Hello and welcome to today's Verified Live. Families of Israeli hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza say the plan by the UK and other European countries to recognise a Palestinian state validates terrorism. Sir Keir Starmer announced yesterday that the UK would recognise a Palestinian state in September unless Israel meets certain conditions in Gaza. Well, in a moment, I'll speak to the lawyer Adam Rose, who represented all the British-Israeli hostages, and to our political correspondent Harry Farley. But yesterday, the UK government stressed that part of the reason for that move now was to try to change the situation on the ground in Gaza. Well, today, the Hamas-run health ministry says 7 more people have died of conditions linked to malnutrition over the last 24 hours. That brings the reported number of hunger-related deaths since the start of the Gaza war to 151 people. 89 of them are children. Aid agents fear that we've reached tipping point where those starvation numbers will accelerate sharply unless the Gaza Strip is flooded with aid. The UN says at least 500 trucks a day are needed. Yesterday, only 115 were actually let in. So let's start this hour speaking to the lawyer Adam Rose, who, as I say, represented all the British-Israeli hostages. And Adam, welcome here to our programme. Your reaction and the family's reaction to what the UK government announced yesterday.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for having me on. I think the families are just distressed to see a statement which puts the condition for recognition of the state of Palestine, on which they express no opinion whatsoever themselves, entirely on Israel's shoulders. Israel has to agree a ceasefire, it says, or else, unless it does so, the UK will recognise the state of Palestine. The situation of the hostages themselves is not made out as a condition in the same way, and that is what offends them.
The hostage families in Israel have said the UK move validates terrorism. Do you and the British families share that view? Do you think it actually perhaps incentivises Hamas not to actually take part in any sort of ceasefire, to stall on that?
Well, it is somewhat bizarre and somewhat perverse the way the document works. The document says in one paragraph, Hamas must release the hostages. And then it says the UK will recognise the state of Israel unless Israel, and it doesn't say unless Hamas also, reaches a ceasefire. So you have this somewhat perverse situation where Hamas is incentivized to hold on to the hostages, because the longer it says it's going to hold on to the hostages, the less likely it is that Israel can agree a ceasefire politically. Militarily, it cannot agree a ceasefire if the very condition on which it's engaging in activity against Hamas is that Hamas is holding these hostages, and Hamas is being effectively encouraged and to hold on to the hostages. I'm not saying for a moment that that is the British government's intention, but it is the impact of the statement made, which has the appearance of being rushed out without fully thinking through what's going on.
So in a sense, you think that's an inadvertent consequence of what they've actually announced and the wording of how they've announced it. I saw that Emily Damari, the British-Israeli hostage who was released back in January, described Sir Keir Starmer's move as, quote, a moral failure. Have you, in the intervening time, had a chance to talk to her? Do you share that view in terms of a moral failure here?
I've spoken to her mother this morning, yes, and it's it has the words, when you look at the words, are extremely unhelpful words on the page from the statement from the government. The statement goes against very clear positioning by the current Prime Minister and the previous Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary Lammy and his predecessor, Foreign Secretary Cameron, that the release of the hostages was required immediately and unconditionally. In other words, it's the very first thing that must happen is the release of the hostages. And this statement does not position things in that way. We wrote to Downing Street late yesterday evening asking for clarification and confirmation that what we were seeing on the paper did not reflect the position of the government, and we have not received clarification from the government that that is the case. I hope the government will realise it's got the wording wrong.
And of course, you have, throughout the last few years, had successive meetings with different prime ministers. So it's interesting what you ask in terms of clarification about the current position. Tell me a little more about the hostages, the British-Israeli hostages who are still being held.
So there were 10 hostages who were either British or very closely connected to the UK, which meant they had a parent, a spouse, or a child who was British. That was a formula that David Cameron adopted and David Lammy carried on. The current position is there are still 2 hostages being held. Avi Natan Or, who we believe is alive. There has been one sighting of him in the past few months, and one of the hostages who came out in the spring reported having seen him. So we hope that Avi Natan is alive. He's a 32-year-old. His girlfriend, Noa Argamani, was with the other hostage who we are representing, Yossi Sharabi. Yossi Sharabi, we know, is dead because Noa Argamani was with him when he died. His body has been held since January 2024. They were both taken hostage in October 2023. So 3 months after he was taken hostage, it was declared and confirmed that he was dead. And when Noa Argamani was rescued by the Israeli army, she confirmed that Yossi Sharabi was dead. So Yossi is dead, and we need his body returned to Israel so that he can be buried. His sister-in-law and her daughters, who were British Israelis, were both murdered on the 7th of October. So that family has had a dreadful time. Avi Natan Or's mother, who is British, is obviously beside herself. She's had 22 months not knowing where her son is, and his state and what he's up to and how he is surviving.
Adam, just a twin final thought, because as well as everything that's happened in the last 24 hours, we've heard repeatedly over the last few days, Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump say that alternative options are now needed and are being looked at to bring the hostages home. How alarmed are the families about that, as well as everything that we heard that you're concerned about yesterday?
So I think the families have been very clear throughout that their position, as would be natural, is they want to have their family member returned. They avoid the politics of it, the geopolitics of it, and they don't get involved. And as a result, I can't get involved on their behalf either. Their concern every day that a living hostage, in the case of Avi Natan Or, that he remains in the terror tunnels of Gaza. Every day there is a risk to his life, and every day that passes is a day closer, potentially, to him not being alive. We try to look at it positively and think every day is a day closer to him returning home.
Adam Rose, we are grateful for your time. Thanks for speaking to us here at BBC News. Let's go straight to our political correspondent, Harry Farley. And Harry, you were listening to that. You heard Adam Rose say inadvertently the government has somehow incentivised Hamas not to reach any sort of ceasefire agreement.
Yes, we've also been making those requests of the government to clarify exactly what the nature of their demands on Hamas are. The Prime Minister said in his announcement yesterday that the Hamas must release all the hostages, they must disarm, they must agree to a ceasefire and accept that they will play no future part in the government of Gaza. But what's not quite clear is whether British recognition of a Palestinian state is conditional on Hamas meeting those demands, or whether they're just a restatement of the requests that the government has been making of Hamas for many months. And now we've been pressing the government for an answer to that, and at the moment haven't heard back. What the government is much clearer about is the conditions that they are putting on Israel. And Keir Starmer said that the UK would recognise a Palestinian state in September unless the Israeli government commits to a long-term sustainable peace, agrees to a ceasefire and makes clear that there will be no annexations in the West Bank. Now, the government does say that there will be an assessment, an assessment process in September, and what they say about that is that is looking at how far both parties, so both the Israeli government and Hamas, have met these steps before they make a final decision. And Downing Street says this is about making sure that neither party has a veto on this decision. What I would say, though, is it will be politically very difficult for the government to row back from recognition of a Palestinian state now that they have put it out there as a realistic option, not least because of the political pressure on the government from its own MPs and from also other ministers in its own cabinet.
Harry, just a quick final thought, because one Labour backbencher has been on television saying that when they were informed about this statement yesterday, they were told there would be no qualifications, no caveats, and then when it came, we saw what the wording was. What is your understanding about what was told to backbenchers and to the lead up, and then what actually appeared?
Well, it's been quite a rapid turnaround, to be honest, in the government's response. As recently as Monday, the government was arguing that recognising a Palestinian state would be a meaningless gesture, effectively, and now they've come to this position yesterday. So there has been quite a quick turnaround. I think most backbenchers, to be honest, were taken by surprise, as many journalists were, by that sort of about turn that the government made. And in terms of their support for it, yes, there will be some who will be disappointed. There are some who are disappointed by the conditions. They believe that a Palestinian statehood is a right of Palestinian people and shouldn't be conditional on Israeli actions. But I think the broad consensus within the Labour Party, the backbench Labour MPs, is that they are pleased that the government has moved on it. And as I say, I think it will be politically difficult for the government to row back from this position now.
Harry Farley, live there at Westminster. Thanks very much. From the political perspective, let's get more about what is actually happening on the ground in Gaza. Yasmin Abu Sultan is a mother in Gaza, and she's been speaking to the BBC, describing how she was struggling to feed her 2-month-old daughter and that she suffered from malnutrition herself during her pregnancy. Have a listen.
I have a daughter who is suffering malnutrition. She is 2 months and 22 days old. At birth, she weighed 2.7 kilos. Now she weighs just 2.6. I appeal to the entire world, please allow my daughter to travel for treatment. If she remains in Gaza, she will die. When pregnant, I was already suffering from malnutrition during the first 3 months and again in the last 3 months. These are the most important stages of fetal development, but I had no proper food to nourish her. As a result, she was born underweight, and her weight hasn't changed since. She needs milk. If she's discharged from the hospital, her condition will worsen.
Well, just one mother's voice from Gaza. Let's speak live to the World Food Programme representative and Palestine country director Antoine Renard, who's there in Gaza for us. Antoine, thank you so much for giving us your time. Tell me, first of all, what you are currently seeing on the ground.
Well, you've just heard the word of this mother. I mean, famine risk is actually growing fast in Gaza. You've got 500,000 of the population that is in the brink of famine. And it is a reality. You hear it from our own voice. We just released an IPC alert just yesterday, which actually clearly described what we feared on the 12th of May, that you do have a lack of access to food. I was just with a family yesterday, same mother telling me in Dar el-Baila, my children, she has 3 children, are only eating a quarter of a loaf of bread on daily basis. Herself, more than 2 days without food, and they're surviving based on the people that are around her. She's a female, headed also 3 children, and she can't actually go and grab food on any of the convoys or any of the distribution centers being operated in Gaza. That's the reality of what we see on the ground.
I spoke to you only a couple of days ago, and you were talking about your worries about how the number of deaths may well accelerate rapidly in the coming weeks. Where are you in terms of being able to actually stop that happening, averting that happening?
Well, that's really one of the challenges we have. We had all the distribution systems that were up and running. We used to have 25 bakeries. We used to have more than 200 distribution points that were actually close to people. We used to also have in support as humanitarian, not just the World Food Programme, 180 kitchens that were out there. our system have been deprived to operate into the Gaza Strip. So the wave of starvation that we have now, we are falling short. Why? Because the despair is so high that we are gradually increasing our capacity to get trucks. I wish I was not speaking about trucks, but we are having now around 60 to 80 trucks on a daily basis for the last 3 days. But the problem is that these trucks are not arriving to any of our distribution system. People are so desperate that they go and run and grab directly the food on these trucks because we have not sufficient routing.
You will have heard what Israel has said, that there is no starvation. They're not restricting aid, blaming the aid agencies themselves for the failure to distribute what they do have. Just your response to all of those different things that they claim.
It's very short to the reality on the ground. I was with our team yesterday, leaving from Dar el Baila, where we had 60 trucks that were actually going on a platform. The World Food Programme requires every day 100 trucks for the coming month to ensure that we can push this wave of starvation away. Again, the reality on the ground, 60 trucks. It took us more than 10 hours to finalize the journey. And at the end, not even reaching with an ounce of food to our distribution points. Again, the reality on the ground, we are forced to use routing with empty trucks in the middle of market. Everybody knows that we're actually leaving Dar el Baila or Khan Yunis to go and fetch food. And we're given a single routing with trucks full of food. We could have served for the last 3 days with all the food that we got in, 330,000 people through our distribution point.
Yes.
Again, the anxiety of the population, the despair, the pause that is currently existing is not sufficient. We require a ceasefire. A last matter on this. 10 hours to move at the end 52 trucks, while we could do during the ceasefire 500 to 600 trucks on a daily basis. That is the reality on the ground.
Antoine Renard, we have to leave it there, but thank you for just painting that picture, describing what you're currently dealing with. Thank you so much for your time.